Salutations, everyone! Welcome back to another Total Warhammer 3 guide. I'm Lord Foran, and today we're going to be talking about 10 tips on how to play the High Elves better. Tip 1. Use influence to get better lords and control faction relationships. This is more of a just general understanding of what these mechanics do because they are neglected by lots of players. If you try and recruit lords, you will find that almost all of them have negative traits. Some are better, some are worse. But overall, it's kind of bad to take a lord and find out, oh, everybody's weaker in range that's in that faction, which really sucks. You need influence to buy better ones, and some of them later on can give good boosts to units, so you want to use influence to get them. The other thing is you really want to use influence to improve relationships. The High Elves are really the only faction that can manipulate other races and other factions' opinions of them. If you're willing to spend the influence, you can make even the most hostile faction to you tolerate you. You'll never really make them love you, but it's an easy way to get confederations to prevent multiple enemies from ganging up on you. For example, if you're at war with Morathi of the Dark Elves, if you keep improving relations with her son, Malekith, you might be able to prevent him from being called into a war to assist his mother. The factions do weigh relations before they declare war. Now, it's hard, but it means that later on you should have heroes, nobles in particular, gaining influence as much as you can. And even on some of the lords, they have ways of getting influence as well. It's worth keeping and using them. You can prevent invasions from plenty of factions. Considering the location of the High Elves, kind of between the old and new worlds, they can easily get dogpiled from the north and west, and sometimes even from the south. So good use of influence will make playing them a lot easier. Tip 2, and this is something of a personal issue, but it's important to remember, and something that shocks a lot of players, is one of your mid-level infantry units, your Ulthuan Seaguards, are ranged units, which is great. The problem is if you go into a battle, they will almost always start with skirmish mode on, meaning they will not hold lines by default. You can turn off skirmish mode, and I highly recommend you probably do so, because they're actually good melee units. But do not necessarily rely on them holding a line unless you turn it off. It's quite possible, and it's a very beginner and even intermediate mistake to forget to do it. There are options that you can apply outside of battles, meaning skirmish mode doesn't start on, but you usually want skirmish on your archers, so just be aware they function more like range units than melee units, even though you probably want to use them as melee units that skirmish and throw and attack before they get into melee. That's the purpose of them. They're very good at that role. Just remember to turn off skirmish. Tip 3. The High Elves are an amazing late-game faction. They're one of the strongest late-game factions. They have a very weak start, though, so that means at the beginning you want to build growth and public order buildings pretty much from the get-go. Public order, because they lack... they have a lot of public order issues. Their public order isn't that great, so it's not uncommon for them to have plenty of revolts and unstable provinces, and growth so that you can get to those late-game buildings and very powerful, like Sisters of Avalorn, even sooner, at which point the High Elves quickly become one of the most powerful factions in the game. Tip 4. The High Elves have amazing range, decent artillery, and good magic units. This allows you to play more defensive than some other factions. You're not necessarily hindered from going on offense. You're pretty good on offense as well. But meaning, if you really want to excel with them in battles, they can function more of a defensive faction. Their artillery, their Eagle Bolt Thrower here is not the world's greatest artillery, but you get it very early on and should use it. Helps with walls. A multi-shot can be very powerful for factions, but also they have some of the best archers in the game. Sisters of Avalorn will pretty much wreck everything given time. Armor piercing, fire, magic, and they have access to, I think, almost all the winds of magic. I think they're lacking a couple, and they're lacking some of the specialized ones. But outside of that, they have the most access to magic in the game. Use it. It's a huge strength of the High Elves to be able to show up with a mage customized to fight the race you're fighting. Remember, fire mages in particular are great against the undead. And There's other ones that specialize in others. Metal, good to reduce heavily armored factions, etc., etc. Pick the right mage for the battle. Bring some artillery. It's not the world's best, but it's good. And definitely unlock those range units early, because they will make the world's difference for a very slow starting faction. Tip 5, if you're not using them, use the dragon units. The High Elves have access to several different types of dragons. They are all very strong and very powerful. Just make sure you avoid flying them into ranged units, and also don't let them get into combat with some of the more powerful lords and heroes, because these dragon units on their own will wreck pretty much every non-lord or hero unit, and will only really go down to either other monsters or heavily focused range fire. They're very powerful, they're super expensive, but they make up for it. Use the breath before they go in, but definitely use dragons in your late game armies. It's truly worth it. It is amazingly powerful using dragon units as the High Elf. Tip 6, build the tech unlocking buildings early or risk stalling out on tech. This is pretty much one of my major grievances with the High Elves. Most of the High Elf tech is locked behind building certain buildings. Now, early on, it's not usually a problem. It's usually just build stuff you're going to build anyway. But down here, you need to build a Elven embassy before you unlock all these, which are all restricted behind buildings. You're going to want to unlock some of these early in Elven Court to unlock all these, which are all very powerful. And don't neglect building these buildings. I recommend try and unlock the next level of tech, especially in the military line, basically as soon as you get to the previous one. You can always go back to research it. You're not limited. But the worst thing in these games is to fall behind on tech. And the High Elves are probably the faction that falls behind the most due to being gated behind buildings. There's a couple others, but it really can hurt them. And especially how strong the High Elves are late game, getting to that tech quicker, very powerful. Tip 7, make sure to use edicts for the High Elves. The High Elves have one, I believe it's called Rebuilding Lost Splendor, which gives both growth and makes constructing buildings in the province much cheaper. Considering the High Elves' rather expensive buildings, you really want to use that. Getting to late game faster, it makes a world difference. If you can get to the late game and start getting top units by turn 50 or so, you're probably doing fairly well. If you can get there sooner, great. But once you move past 50 to 80 turns and you're not hitting late game, you're really not playing the High Elves correctly. They rely on powerful ones, and that edict, which gives growth and cheaper buildings, perfect for them. Everything you need to make the High Elves that much stronger. Tip 8. If you start in Ulthuan, which is the High Elves' kind of special island here, focus on controlling the island before you go abroad. And even if you start over here as the, I always forget these names, the Illyrian or whatever, Altharian, you probably want to come back and focus on the island before you go abroad. This island here, the inner ring here is very protected, meaning you can put economy there and it will probably never be invaded unless you're already losing the game. But if you go abroad, there are threats up here. There's Nikari, there's Dark Elves. You also don't want the other High Elves to gain control of the island because it makes them hard to confederate. But you don't really want to start invading the Dark Elves till you have control of the island. You're going to have to fight vampires, Slanesh, some Dark Elves, some Greenskins before the island's controlled. But once you do, you'll probably be the richest and most powerful faction in the game already. There are a ton of settlements here. They're very valuable. Build up the gates, focus on controlling it, and then expand elsewhere. If you're playing Alariel the Everqueen, it's even more of a necessity because she gains bonuses for controlling it. But Tyrion and Altharian also can prosper from that. And even the Kalidor guy can get back by annexing or confederating this faction and then focus on expanding there. It's a great island. If you go abroad, you're probably going to regret it. That's my advice. Tip 9, and it's actually in the reverse of many tips I give, which is usually avoid armor pen. In this case, the High Elves lack easy access to armor pen. Their starting units here are unable to get armor pen for quite a while. White Lions of Chase is probably your first one, but by and large, the High Elves don't deal with armor penetration until they hit their elite late game units. So just be aware if you're fighting heavily armored factions, Warriors of Chaos, Greenskins, quite a few of the Dark Elves, or even Dwarves, you're going to struggle killing them early on. Bringing the artillery helps and magic, but by and large, just be aware of the armored factions. You're not really that good against them till you get to your mid or high level infantry units. And then you even have to focus on it a bit because not all their units come with armor pen. And the final tip, and I've kind of already hinted about it, is make only 1 to 2 unit trading provinces. The rest of your provinces should be economy focused. The high elf units get to be absurdly expensive, like 500 for a single dragon, or 60 for infantry, 300, 400. They are very expensive. Although the high elves can build to a good economy, since their public order does give them money, and they do get trinkets and they can boost themselves, and some of their heroes boost income, you really don't need tons of construction buildings. Focus your construction in a couple provinces. Lotharin is a particularly great province to build your industry in. You do need probably 2 because you can't fit all the construction in 1 and still make it useful. But don't go crazy building multiple training centers. The high elves are very centralized faction, and outside of those unit production centers, every other province you have is expendable except for the money. So don't put your economy on the outsides of the island if you're playing here, or just be aware that coastal provinces are much more vulnerable. That's what makes this area so strong, because it's very sheltered. So everywhere else should be economy. You can maintain some crazy armies within a crazy economy late game, but you have to focus on it. And the key is really specialized provinces into economy. Don't try and be a jack of all trades. Centralize, go out, defend your centralized ones with garrisons and stuff. But outside of that, just make money. Tons of money, all the money. And manipulate everybody with influence to get trade agreements. Anyhow, that will be it for this guide. Hopefully it's helped you play the High Elves better. They're a very interesting faction, arguably one of the most strongest at the late game. Takes some time to get there. Their early game is rather weak, so just be aware of that. They have really good lords and some very good magic users. So take advantage of those and go out there and rebuild the world. Thanks for watching. If you have any tips, stick them below in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, those good stuff if you haven't already done so. And I will see you in another guide or let's play. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.